Nicholson-Smith of At the Letters, our MLB editor, insider, writer. You're just everything. You know, I saw you on Central yesterday after the All-Star game. Like, you're just the everything man. What is your title? What do you choose as a title when you introduce yourself to people? Like, if you were back in the dating market, what would you say you are?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I would say I work for Sportsnet
Oh,
and I
yeah.
cover the Toronto Blue Jays.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
That's very
I would
modest.
keep it simple because there's really, you're right. I do a lot of different things depending on the day.
Yeah, true. Okay, so I just had Jeff Ponce on my show. He covers the Blue Jays for Baseball America. He's like really plugged in, watches a ton of their minor league players. We chatted about the draft. He gave it a B, which I thought was pretty good. And he said, yeah, you know what? They took a couple of upside guys, and that's a little different from what they've done. They are very used to drafting, college players. I think that I deleted it. That's pretty stupid. But I think that all but 5 of their picks were NCAA guys. They took an upside guy in the 3rd round. They took another upside guy kind of later in the draft. But for the most part, they sort of stuck to what they know, which is college. They added a lot of pitchers. And it was kind of the same philosophy which this scouting department has used for the last bunch of drafts that hasn't worked. They had a guy fall to them, but also it did remind me that people were ecstatic when Austin Martin fell to the Blue Jays. And yeah, it's like it's not a guarantee just because someone falls to you. You wrote this great article on the Blue Jays draft, and I want to touch on this before we move into the kind of the second half storyline stuff. But when is enough for a scouting department that has this many misses? Like, you put the article out there, you put a tweet out there of the combined WAR of their first round picks. I know there's a couple of years before we're going to know like what Yesevich is, right, or how they did in last year's draft. But like, how do you credibly continue to let a group that has had this many failures go out there and continue to run your drafts?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think I've heard from people with other teams who look at this group and they're not especially impressed by it. Someone said that this draft should be a kind of make or break draft for Shane Farrell, whose first draft was 2020, which is at this point that's a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, Austin Martin, I think we can pretty safely say that that's not a great pick. Looking back at that one 4 years later, he's more of a utility player in the major leagues. So
Again,
look,
still
Mark
young-ish.
Shapiro,
He's 25. He's going on
yeah,
26, but he's a negative WAR player right now with the Twins.
which is a pattern when you
Yeah.
look at the Blue Jays' first round picks. They have a lot of negative WAR players, and Alek Manoah has been really good. And I understand it's not just about the first round. Bo Bichette was a great second round pick,
Sure.
and you can find value later. In theory, the Jays haven't actually found a ton of value later in drafts. So I think you can answer this question in a lot of different ways. And I'm not trying to hedge here
Mm-hmm.
because fundamentally, you look at the results; they're not good enough. That's very clear. That's what the numbers and the results tell us, right? This has not been a front office that's taken advantage of the opportunities that they've had in the draft, and you can see the impact on the field this year. Like it's a big deal, but you can legitimately look at the question of how to proceed here in different ways. I don't think the Blue Jays are going to make a change with Shane Farrell. I think that they might make a change at the GM role, but I don't think that Shane Farrell is going to be ousted. I think the way Mark Shapiro looks at these things is very much from a systems level, and they want to have a system in place. And they do have a better system in place. It just hasn't led to better results. And end of the day, you got to have the results. So that's the missing piece for the Blue Jays is actually getting the good players.
I got to tell you, this is why I was calling for Ross Atkins' job last offseason. Like, I was pretty vocal about it. I thought it was an easy win for Shapiro. I couldn't really understand why the Blue Jays backed him despite such a frustrating season and one where there wasn't going to be a lot of roster turnover. I thought, hey, take the easy one. And maybe this is where my stupid brain comes in, where I go, like, if I was a wrestler, I'd be the cheap heat guy, right? I would do the thing like, I love it here in San Diego. They'd go nuts. And I'd be like, yes, that's all I'm here to provide. But I couldn't understand why I brought him back. Now it actually does feel too late for an Atkins move. One, because he's still the head of this baseball team. Like you had him in here for another offseason that didn't work out. You're letting him, I think, run the trade deadline at a time where you're going to be selling some pieces. And now it kind of feels like if he is in fact fired at the end of the season, which it feels like it's tracking that way, it's like, okay, it's ceremonial. Awesome. Now we know who Shane Farrell is, right? We know who's blotched all these drafts. And if he's not leaving, who cares? Like if Shapiro's not leaving, then who cares? And now all of a sudden, do I think Ross Atkins deserves to still be the general manager of this team? No. But if you're not doing it now, it just feels so performative to me at the end of the year. Like why are they letting him run this trade deadline? Do you think that he is running this trade deadline? Is this like now all completely shadow Shapiro? Like where are you at in terms of who's actually pulling the levers and what kind of controls they have here heading into what I think is a pretty damn important time for what this Blue Jays team is going to be next year and beyond?
Yeah, it's so important. It really is. I mean, you look back at their deadlines and the swings between, hey, you get Billy McKinney, or oh, you actually found Teoscar Hernandez.
Yeah.
That's massive, right?
Yeah.
Like, and to be fair, those were both deals under Ross Atkins. So
Yep.
he's had good deals, he's had bad deals. That's going to happen when you're a GM for now 9 summers, right? You have chances to do some good and to take some whiffs. But as for what's happening this year, yeah, my understanding is that Ross Atkins is definitely the one running the show. I mean, certainly, I haven't heard from any other teams that are saying like Ross is nowhere to be seen. I think it's business as usual as far as all the conversations that I've had. So he is involved now. I don't think that the Blue Jays are making a significant deal without Mark Shapiro's knowledge. I'd be surprised if that was the case. Maybe, sure, can you trade Kevin Kiermaier and cash considerations for a low-level prospect? Yeah, they could probably do that without having Mark involved. But once you even start talking about Yusei Kikuchi, I would think that there's a level of organizational oversight there. But yeah, as far as why they wouldn't make a change now if they're seriously considering one, I guess like here's the point that someone made to me who's very familiar with how these processes work, someone who's been at very high levels within MLB front offices, and they made the point that you can't functionally undergo a search for a general manager in July. You can't do it because all the candidates that you might actually want to talk to are busy with other teams. So
but I don't mind that part. But I don't mind that you don't need to replace the GM. Just I think for the sake of sanity amongst the fan base, like this is what I don't get is like, so we've got these layers of where you go, well, if Atkins is there, then Shapiro has a shield. I think that shield's gone. Like that's my thing is just you be the guy. Like you be the voice of the room. Let fans know that Atkins at least is not pulling something here, and move on. Go. I'm the guy. I'm the one that's doing this job. We don't need a fake GM that everybody knows is fired at the end of the year. People are like, oh well, we're gonna watch whether Atkins, if he misses the playoffs, he loses. Jays are at 1%. They're missing the playoffs. The team sucks. They're selling. Like they got the worst bullpen of all baseball. There's no miracle turnaround happening here, right? Like I just. Remove the veil because sports fans are smart enough now to know that like this is not consequential whatever he's doing here. Like I just don't that part of it of like the searching for the new guy. Sorry to cut you off. Like I hate doing that. But it's just the idea that they need to replace the guy immediately. It's like no. Shapiro, just be the guy. Be the guy.
Well, I don't think that I don't think Mark Shapiro at this point in his career is going to be an interim GM.
No.
So it would have to be James Click or Mike Moreau for someone who's in that front office, and they could do that. To be fair, they could make that call. I definitely don't anticipate that's happening. I think Ross Atkins is running this trade deadline. I think we will hear from him after the trade deadline. What happens beyond that is really where it gets interesting. And look, I mean, there is uncertainty here, right? And no one, you talk about the conversations that you and I are having, fans are having, even the conversations that happen behind closed doors within the industry. People are wondering what's next with Ross Atkins. And I think that when you look at Mark Shapiro's role in this, he hasn't spoken publicly to the media since spring training, right? So this, if he wanted to dispel the notion that Ross Atkins was in jeopardy or that Ross Atkins was on the hot seat, he could call your show up and say, hey, just to let you know, JD, Ross is coming back. Like we have full faith in him. He's our guy. But
yeah, cool.
Mark Shapiro
he's like wants pitchforks outside of his office.
And Mark Shapiro,
like being the drunk guy at the bar that like pokes the bouncer in the chest is like, you're not so tough. Like that would literally be that equivalent.
Well, look, I mean, Mark Shapiro is someone who is convicted in his approach, and he's someone also who doesn't mind doing unpopular things. I mean, I think we've seen that. So it wouldn't be the first time that he would have made an unpopular move. But at the same time, we have not seen him do that. We have not heard him do that. He has not spoken publicly, knowing, presumably that he would be asked right away about Ross Atkins and the job he has done. There has been no word from Mark Shapiro since spring training. So that kind of allows for this uncertainty to continue. And we can draw our own conclusions from that. But, this is an extended stretch for him not to address the public.
Yeah, especially when you consider the ballpark renovations were completely finished. And he loves doing the jump on the broadcast and talk about the stadium and the state of the franchise. Like, he never even did that move.
Well, yeah, and I think that would be one thing, but to take questions from the media
Of
would
course.
be a different one.
No, I'm
Yeah,
just saying
and
that he
would,
didn't even do the cheap pop thing that I mentioned. Like, he didn't even go for that one, which is like the only times that I've ever really been a Shapiro fan, or when he speaks with Dan on the broadcast. I go, oh, this guy loves baseball. He gets baseball. He knows how to speak to the fan base. He gets it. And then, yeah, the last media conference he had about running it back essentially and not understanding why it was a slog and looking at their communication only to have this season. Like, yeah, maybe there's a reason why he doesn't want to speak. I just think it's really tough. It's now become a tough look when you make the move too late to fire a general manager, because now everyone has realized it's on you. And Toronto sports, like, everybody understands this now because we just saw it with Kyle Dubas and Brendan Shanahan, where they were like, fire the GM, and there was this big celebration, and now all of a sudden everything stayed the exact same, and you go, oh, right, that guy's boss for a reason. He does ask for permission on major moves, and so yeah, some of this can just kind of end up being ceremonial. Or feeling ceremonial, at least.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a through line with if the Blue Jays do make a change and there's a new GM, then there will be consistency as far as some aspects of how things run. I do think at the same time, like, Ross Atkins is not just a figurehead. Ross Atkins has made moves and has had the authority to make trades, make free agent signings. So it's always difficult to parse exactly how much is him, how much is Mark Shapiro. But
Sure.
in no way has this just been the Mark Shapiro show for the last 8.5 years. I mean, Ross Atkins has had many, many, many chances to do things differently. Obviously, he's working within a system and a process to use their word that very much is a Shapiro and a Blue Jays thing, and that's not going anywhere. But if you're a GM for 8.5 years, you have so many chances to be creative, to think outside the box, to acquire players that no one is thinking about. And no team president is going to step in the way and say, hey, stop thinking about this. So Ross Atkins has had certainly some chances. And if they do go down a different pathway, that GM would have chances to bring their own creativity to the role.
Yeah. What's funny is, if I was Ross Atkins, I would actually be pushing like hell to sell. Because to me, the best look for him would be that realistic look at the organization. Yeah. And for him to make a multitude of moves where maybe he hits on one that he can point to with a different organization someday and be like, hey, whatever you want to say, that Blue Jays team stunk, and they had just renovated the stadium, and they really wanted to win. It was a hungry fan base, and I still ended up making more aggressive moves than selling just the rental pieces. What is your pulse today? What is the feeling today for you when it comes to the we got to compete in 25 theory, or we're really going to try to compete in 25 theory? Because that has been the prevailing one. And yet, I don't know. This is purely me with the vibes feeling, as well as like a couple of feelers to some insiders. But yeah, do you feel like that's as strong moving forward as it was even, say, a couple of weeks ago, that it was like only the rental players are going to move? Do you think that there's a higher possibility now that there's a larger chunk taken out of this roster?
So I don't think you're going to like this answer, JD. I'm sorry to say. But my sense from talking not only to people in the Blue Jays organization who are involved in this process, but also people outside of the organization, is that the Blue Jays are expected to sell their rentals, and that's it. My expectation, based on the conversations that I've had, is the Blue Jays plan to try to win next year. And maybe we want to get into this because there is like a really good debate to be had here. But that is my sense, is that they are going to try to win next year.
So I did a long rant like last week with Ennis. I think I called it the Crazy Pill Show, where I was like, I outlined all the needs the Jays have in order to compete next year. And so I don't need to go fully into it, but I will tell you this. I didn't add this reason to why they should not go that route and why they absolutely need to trade Kevin Gausman at the very least right now. You can't push your problems into next year because the staff isn't as good as it was a year ago. This like past offseason when you were looking at the Jays and saying, hey, kind of run it back and hope for positive regression with the offense. I didn't agree with it. I was a proponent of make more significant trades. I wanted them to move Bo Bichette last offseason, for God's sakes. Like I think I'm on the very aggressive side of things when it comes to this baseball team. I'm not professing to be right. I just am saying that I know where I'm kind of like standing when it comes to the aisle. But when you were making the case, you could go, look at this pitching staff. They might get Alek Manoah back. We, at least at the time, believed Bowden Francis could be a serviceable swingman. We wanted to see Yariel Rodriguez. Bassett was coming back. Gausman had a terrific year. Barrios had a terrific year. And you looked at the pitching staff and you said, and I'm not even talking about the bullpen. Like this is just the starting pitching. You could look at the starting pitching and go, this is really, really good. This is one of the envies of baseball. I don't think it's that anymore. Gausman has taken a obvious step backwards. And if you are going to sell him, you're definitely trying to make sure that a team gets him when they can still believe like, hey, there could be like a really good one last run in him. He's still shown flashes of it, right? Like it's not as though he's gone in the tank. And he is a year and a half of control, and people at the deadline pay for pitching. Bassett is going to be another year older, and he's been brilliant. I actually think that you keep him as an innings eater. That's totally fine for me, especially given that I'm not sure if another team is going to pay through the nose in order to get Chris Bassett. But Jose Barrios, and you wrote this in your last article, since, I think it's in 13 starts.
Since May 1st.
Yeah. 13 starts, 5.5 ERA. Sure, has he bounced back before? Has he showcased that? Yes. But all of this together is to say, oh, and now with Manoah's injury and Bowden Francis showing that, he can't get outs, like I don't think he should be involved with your rotation if you're a credible team at all, like at any portion of it, long relief, no point of it. Ricky Tiedemann's injury, you don't have the help coming from underneath that you can rely upon. There is no evidence that this Blue Jays pitching staff, which was, again, their strong suit, is going to come back in 2025 and look like a credible or strong or, playoff contending rotation. Like it just, you can't make that case to me.
Yeah. The rotation is not what it was a year ago. It's just not. And so when you project that forward, everyone gets a year older. You run the risk of, possible injuries anytime you're talking about pitching. So it's not the backbone of this team in the way that it once was for a couple of years there. So
that's it.
It makes it that much harder, right, to build. So I think that a point that a few people have made to me in discussing the Blue Jays is you're essentially looking at a trade-off. You can try to win next year, and I still think that's a viable choice. If you do it and you make the right moves, you legit could be in the playoffs. You could go on a run. That possibility is there. You got Vlad Jr., you got some good players. It's not impossible. That is a real possibility. So, I'm not opposed to that. But if you go down that path, regardless of whether you win or lose, it is going to make an eventual reset longer and harder. And so that's the trade-off you're talking about. So the alternative is you say, all right, maybe we do like a little half step back. Maybe it's more of like Mets vibes where the Mets are like happy to be winning right now, but this isn't really their year. And the last offseason, they kind of, they're trying to reset. They're trying to reset on the fly. And if the Blue Jays were to make that sort of move, I also think that would be a viable choice because in no way, in my opinion, should a long tank be on the table. I think that's a disservice to fans. Right. And so, we can put that aside. But if we're talking about like a 1-year reset where, hey, maybe you sell Gausman and Bassett, maybe you trade Chad Green at the deadline, and then you go into free agency this offseason and you spend, you're not taking a pass in free agency. You spend on guys who can help you for the next 3 years. And look, maybe that means that you're a 79 and 83 win team next year. That's fine. And then you're really good in 26. Like that's also to me a viable path.
Dude, this is my thing. I don't think that first of all, with the new setup with baseball's playoffs, I don't think that there's ever, this market in particular, I don't think we're ever going to see 5-year tear down, horrible roster, no good players on it. Like maybe ever again. I just don't think that's what I'm saying. I don't think that that's what it's going to be. And I don't think most people are advocating for that. Like there's obviously going to be, like I said it, I think I'm at the most extreme end of the reasonable-ish people when it comes to this roster. But to me, it's that you need to represent what you actually are. And that's why not trading Gossman is so infuriating to me if you don't end up doing that. You're not a contender next year. Like, you're just not. You can come back and you can make a push for the playoffs and you can do these things, but you need to be able to add the flexibility of more trades. You cannot do this on just free agency alone. We've seen that. Like, anybody wants to complain about the budget right now? I just saw a graph of what teams' revenue to payroll percentages are actually reflected. Jays are second highest in terms of what they make a year and how much goes into payroll. 75% of their earnings go into it. They are always going over the top now financially. And that extends beyond free agents too. That's been like the stadium. That's been the way that they treat players. Like, go look at what Justin Turner has to say about how this organization treats players and families now. They go above and beyond because they have to. Look at what they've done with Dunedin and their spring training facilities. Like, they have sunk a ton of money into this thing, and still it's not working. You have to draft. You have to develop. You have to have other prospects in the farm system that are going to be attractive in trades to other teams. And right now what the Blue Jays have is a draft where they may have just taken their number one prospect. Like, that's what Jeff Ponce and I just discussed. Is, did you draft your number one prospect? Like, that's crazy that you're that thin, that you're that weak. You've got a ton of injuries to your pitching staff that are in the farm system. You've missed on just about everything. You've got some good bench players. That's well and fine. You need to take a year where you sell, you acquire assets at their premium, and then you move into next year, try to compete, sign those free agents, be aggressive, do those things, wait a year when it comes to trades, and then make your push the following year and try to get right back in that competitive cycle with still Vladdy at the head of the snake. But like, the idea or the misnomer that you could just keep these guys and here's what it all comes down to. I'm being super long-winded. You no longer can just do the thing where you take cents on the dollar for players that are not long-term pieces with this organization. You don't get the luxury of doing own rentals, as the Leafs used to put it. Like, you need to make sure you get maximum return on the assets you have right now, because what you have in the cupboards is not enough if you want to meaningfully compete in 2 years.
Yeah, this is where it ties back to the draft, because if you do have a team that's drafting and developing well, and this is something that Mark Shapiro talked about, waves of talent, right, coming up through the system, has not happened, especially on the pitching side. They're so light on pitching coming up, which is why they've had to go out in free agency and spend, and great. Those free agent deals have been good. Those deals, by the way, that is a credit to Ross Atkins. Those are good free agent deals. And then, again, as long as because I want to be fair in this, as long as we're talking about the big picture of this franchise, you mentioned how they spent. You mentioned how around the league, there's an understanding of how well the Blue Jays treat their players and the facilities. The spending, the facilities, that is a credit to Mark Shapiro. That wasn't the case 10, 12 years ago. The Blue Jays were spending way less. Their facilities were way worse. So, again, just to be fair here, that is a credit to what he's done. Now, there are many other things that he's responsible for where the Blue Jays have not excelled. And they want to excel, right? They talk about winning championships. If you want to excel, you can't look yourself in the mirror at this baseball team and with this farm system and say that you're where you want to be 8.5 years in. It can't be enough. It can't be acceptable to the standard that they've talked about, and the money that they're spending, they need to get more out of it. So, I think you make some good points there. And I guess my one question to you is, and it's not a question that you could answer, so I guess it's totally unfair. Ross Atkins can't answer this right now. No one can. We'll have to see how it plays out. But I just wonder what the Blue Jays would get for Kevin Gausman if they were putting him out there, or Chad Green, or even Chris Bassett.
I just
wonder what that return is.
I can't answer that, but what I will say is every deadline, teams pay for pitching. Like, they overpay for it's like a tale as old as time. You look at every deadline and you look at what a pitcher went for, and usually the team that sold a pitcher ends up getting quite a return. Kevin Gausman. Yeah, Kevin Gossman, who is not having a good season, has still gone out there at times and struck out a whole hell of a lot of players. You know what plays come postseason baseball? Guys who get strikeouts. And if you put Kevin Gossman out there for game 2 of a playoff series, that's credible still in 2024. Like, despite his down year, that is still a credible, viable option. You cannot go through all of the playoff teams right now and show me that every team has a better option in the second game of the playoffs than Gossman. So with that in mind, do I think that it's as high as you would have hoped, a year ago or last offseason? Clearly not. Is there a case to be made that if you're trying to compete and you go, well, they always overpay for pitching. If we miss the playoffs next year, we'll sell them as a rental. Sure. But I have to believe, based on a balance of probabilities and past, past trades, that a year and a half of a guy who can give you a real playoff start, who has that high of upside, and who also is not just giving you one playoff run, but 2, and that includes the innings next year for a guy that stays healthy, that he would have still very meaningful value. More value than a year from now if you are deciding to move him as a rental who puts together another full season of this. Like, if he goes into next year and he's up and down and he's on the final year of a deal, then I don't think you're going to get much from him at all. And so my guess is that he has value now. Is it perfect? No. Is it more than it will be next year? Yes. And that is why you have to trade him this year.
Yeah. Gossman under contract through 26.
Yeah.
So he is 2.5 years.
Oh, it's 2.5? I thought it was only 1.5.
Yeah, 2.5 more years. So we'll see how that value goes. But no, I think you make some fair points there. I think he would have value. Again, I'm not sure it's like totally transformative, but I think it'd be real value. And, as an organization too, you have to be prepared to lean into your strengths. And if one of the strengths of the Blue Jays organization is signing free agent pitching, acquiring veteran pitchers and getting the most out of them, as they've done with Bassett, with Gossman, with Kikuchi, with Steven Matz, with Robbie Ray. I mean, the list goes on. Put them with Pete Walker and then get some good results. Then, clearly the front office, say what you will about the front office, they've done a good job of identifying free agent starting pitching targets. So
agree. That's why. Lean into it.
Maybe they can do that again.
Yeah,
right?
Lean into that.
Yeah,
Go find the next Robbie Ray.
And so maybe you're able to do that and acquire 3 of those guys this winter, maybe a couple starters and a reliever and, some minor league deals, some waiver claims, continue rounding things out. Obviously, you're going to try to trade for pitching this deadline as well. Then maybe the pitching staff looks a whole lot different next year, but it's serviceable. It's trending in the right direction. And look, none of what we're saying here, I think, rules out the possibility that the 2025 Blue Jays could put together a wild card run. Like, we're not talking about a team that would be a total disaster.
I think if you look at some of the teams that have made wild card runs these last 2 seasons, and like this year included, not everyone all put them down in pen as, well, these are the teams that'll be there, right? Like, even the Red Sox, for example, like, no one thought the Red Sox were going to be good, and they are. And I just think that this stuff can happen very quickly. You only need a couple of moves to hit. I'm not discounting the idea that they can be relevant in 2025. I just think that they need to be realistic of how desperately they need to restock the cupboards to add that flexibility of trades when they are really competitive again. And that they got to know that there are players on this team right now that I don't think are going to be a part of the next Blue Jays championship aiming contender team. And one of those guys is Kevin Gossman. The other is Bassett. I do think that you need some innings next year, and I'm not sure whether a team is going to pay for him when they can't project him as a guy who starts as their number 2 guy in the postseason, right? Like, it's easier to go through, even though he's pitching well and he's been better than Gossman this year. I think from like an upside playoff standpoint, I'm not as sure on the Bassett one. But either way, I'm not against the Bassett trade either. Like, if they got the right price for Bassett, I would be doing that too. And then, you know me, I don't think that Bo is going to sign. I would be trying to trade him this offseason if you can, rather than letting him walk for nothing. But I feel like he actually is going to end up as a walk for nothing guy. Okay, so your biggest second half question then is what? Because it sounds like you think, well, I don't want to say you think, you're informed in this. This isn't just like your opinion. But if the idea is that they are going to trade rentals, they're not going to fire John Schneider. They're not going to fire Ross Atkins in season. What is the thing that is most interesting you about the second stretch? It can be like a player's play, development, trade, whatever. What's the biggest question mark for you?
Yeah, well, I do agree, first of all, that, yeah, despite our whole conversation there, yeah, just to circle back, I'm not anticipating that the Blue Jays sell on that scale.
Yeah,
I am anticipating, again, that the Blue
rentals.
Jays sell on us rentals.
Yep,
Exactly.
yep,
So, the biggest question for me is what they get back.
yeah.
And, that's going to be super interesting. I'm not sitting here expecting the Blue Jays to turn this group of players into, a bunch of five top prospects. That's not how it works. But there is an opportunity here to get some players who can really contribute for a few seasons. Maybe it's prospects, maybe it's young major leaguers. Um, even choosing between those two buckets, I'll be really fascinated to see what they do get back, presuming
Mhm.
that they do follow this path. So yeah, that to me has to be the biggest question, more so than anything to do with the players on the field. But if we're talking about players on the field, then it's Bo Bichette and
Yeah.
what he can do to kind of restore some balance and some order and some value to his game in the second half.
Yeah, God, I really hope he plays well. Like, yeah, it would be very nice for the Blue Jays and for Bo Bichette and just all parties involved if this doesn't end up just a nightmare final stretch and it gets to like Donaldson land, where
Yeah,
it's ugly between the two team or the two sides, and then you end up looking at it and going, well, everybody lost. you know,
yeah.
every everybody lost on this. Ben, great work as always. Thank you for reporting news I didn't want to hear to me. And you got a true friend when they tell you something you don't want to hear. So, I value our friendship, buddy. Thanks so much for doing
Yeah,
this.
exactly. All right, man. Thanks, JD. Anytime.
Take care, pal.